Thank you very much, Kaylee, and thank you all for joining us on this busy day in the middle of March. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that although we're probably joining from all over across the province and perhaps beyond, Julia and I live and work in Treaty 6 territory, which is also Métis Region 4. And of course, this is a historic and current gathering place for many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And of course, it's Julia and I's pleasure and privilege to get to live and work in Amiskwichi, Wisconsin. I also want to note that, with regards to instructional videos or videos of any kind, they're a great medium for sharing culture and information, whether that's a large-scale project like the Indigenous Canada MOOC that the University of Alberta created, or even just a simple short TikTok video. Video really is, in many ways, the medium, certainly of the 21st century. I also want to include one quick acknowledgement as well, just before passing things over to Julia, and in particular in relation to thinking of track. It was always Ernie Engel's vision when he was director of the school that the library community and the library faculty would be served by making use of the track system, and particularly encouraged the faculty to share what they were doing and some of their insights with the broader community. And of course, we lost Ernie last year, but I'm glad and very fortunate to be able to share some of the work that Julia and I have been doing in a couple of different projects now in terms of making videos. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to be here and really happy with the turnout as well. So my name is Julia Guy, and I'm a grad student at the University of Alberta. I'm currently working towards a master's in digital humanities and library and information studies. I also have a BFA in acting that I got from U of A. So I've worked professionally as a theater actor and voiceover actor and have some training in film and television as well. So some of what I'll be speaking to in the presentation draws from that experience as well.
Thank you, Julia. And, where we're coming from, I work at the library school. That's a bit about me, but where we're coming from, of course, is two projects, one of which was always a video-based project, and the other one has become a video-based project over the past, pretty much exactly a year now. So Digital NWT is a partnership of many organizations, including the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, the Sawtooth Renewable Resources Board, the Tlichio Government, and the Gwich'in Tribal Council. And they have partnered with many organizations both across the Northwest Territories and the University of Alberta, as well as other partners, to deliver digital literacy training to communities across the NWT. And video was never a part of that original plan for that project. But since the pandemic, we have all of a sudden been working to develop video, not only on digital literacy subjects, but in conditions where you can't rely on broadband and even necessarily people having digital devices. So a lot of our thinking is in part informed by that. And previously, both Julia and I, and I'm still involved with, the Opening Up Copyright Project, which is a series of openly licensed interactive instructional videos on copyright from the University of Alberta. And it itself is a multi-partner project, including several U of A units. And lastly, some of the final pieces I draw on as well. I also teach LIS 526, which is instructional practices in LIS. So I'm also responsible for covering some of this and experimenting with some of the video approaches in the LIS education program. So we've seen a real, switch over and change in video over the past 30 years. We used to think of video as requiring a film studio, lots of time, lots of money. And that's really no longer the case. The technologies have been democratized. Almost all of us have access to audio and video recording equipment. It doesn't even need to be done with a computer anymore. In fact, now with this past year, we can get all the way to the point you can have people in masks, even small children potentially on a rather amateurish looking setup, giving some sort of instruction. And of course, we know now that YouTube is in fact probably the greatest educational source, certainly of video. And while there's a lot of different content on YouTube, there's over 1 billion hours of content added kind of all the time. And so it's become a rather democratized form, and thus, it's more accessible to the general population. We have, of course, the internet and applications like YouTube to share video. And we've also seen a real opening up too in terms of who might be an instructor or a presenter. So if we thought of educational video, perhaps you could think back to the 1980s. You get professor behind a lecture and someone in a lab coat, someone in front of a wall of books trying to look very scholarly and authoritative. And now that's not the case at all. So really, even a small child could appear in an instructional video, and there'd be an audience for that. So we want to begin with the best practices. These really come out of the academic literature. And before getting right into them, I want to stress that these are kind of always subject to interpretation, application, use, and maybe we'll get to the example later on, even abuse by times. But generally, it's worthwhile to have learning objectives right up front, communicated, and certainly perhaps at the back. These are valuable for a couple of different reasons, particularly if you're doing from an instructional design perspective. They help chunk the content, focus the content, tell the learner what the video is about, and also constrain the video too, because length is an important one. So just as a highlighted an example, we didn't put learning objectives at the beginning of this presentation, in part because it isn't necessarily the same as a purpose-built instructional video. It's also a bit longer, and we're hoping certainly with the Q&A, there might be learning opportunities or objectives that get met that we couldn't conceive. Using scripts is another suggestion. Certainly in recorded video, there are several advantages to scripts. It gets rid of those ums and ahs, and I am a terrible person for including them. So scripting is a great way to eliminate some of that. That said, there are some times when you may want to not use scripts, and Julia will cover that more. Another key piece is having a conversational narrative, and this actually can be quite challenging with scripts. Sometimes we're really focused on instruction, chunking content, making things short, and then it sounds like some sort of robot is providing the instruction. So trying to keep things less formal. It is not as if you were writing a scholarly paper. Interactivity is another big element. Hopefully we'll be able to get some Q&A and some interaction back and forth as we go on. But with recorded video, this can be more challenging. And I'll talk a little bit about this in terms of software options and some of the other techniques you can use at the end. Chunking content relates to many of the above pieces. You'll want to think within a video project, is this one video or multiple videos? And then how within each video might you segment things? In a kind of larger scale project like digital NWT, we actually have courses then that have sub videos that are then broken into smaller videos. So you really want to think about how to break things up, and that ties into the next piece of keeping things short. The academic literature is really clear that 3 to 4 minutes is what you keep people engaged for. This may seem really short, but it's not that surprising. I mean, the literature on classroom settings say people stay engaged for about 12 minutes, 20 minutes is pushing it. And so, chunking content, shortening things down is a good way to keep things short and forceful. But there are instances where you may want to go longer. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our insights later on. And lastly, I think if there's one thing you want to do, it is avoid the large text-filled block, especially reading the large blocks of text that are highly disengaging, well, including a full, I can't even do this. I can't even read my own slide. One of the real advantages of video is that you get both the audio and the image, but the last thing one should do is try and provide a red paper that also appears on screen. So in terms of video benefits and challenges, as I noted, it's a visual and auditory medium, and that gives you a chance to balance some of those elements. So you can do two things at once, and there's a variety of approaches for how you might do this. Julia and I will show you several different types of video that we've developed and created over the two projects and as well that I've used in the classroom. But it's certainly a really rich medium. You can get a lot more information across than you could in a purely textual paper-like format, and even in a more only audio format. You could do a lot with it too. It's a very diverse medium. Julia and I have done everything from kind of direct address, where you're talking on the screen, slides like you see now. We'll talk a little bit about puppets. I've got a slide on instructional avatars. And so there's all kinds of different things you can do. And you can really appeal to a broad range of learners that way. Both audio learners and visual learners can really get engaged by the medium. Another really big benefit too is viewer control. You can have something that's complicated, and particularly if it's a recorded video, you know that people will be able to go back and watch it again and again and again. And so you don't have to worry about necessarily delaying and going back over content 2 or 3 times, because people can rewatch it. It's also a medium where people are in control of usually the time and the place where they get to watch it as well. So it can be used and designed for a specific point of need or a point of instruction, or it can be something that's kind of always available. A very flexible medium. Challenges, of course, we've probably all had a lot of interest in video over the past year now because of the pandemic, but it is likely going to be a lot less popular in hopefully a year's time when we go back to face-to-face. So despite all of the challenges that or all of the benefits that video has, people still tend to prefer sitting down face-to-face. There are a group of learners for whom distance learning and video-based learning really appeals, but for many of us, ultimately we want to be in an in-person learning environment. And there are some in-person advantages, active learning and really bringing in rich hands-on examples that don't translate as well. And I think certainly as we get out of this environment, whenever that is, I think video will be the least popular form in the short term. And I think perhaps the biggest side of the challenges, though, is just how demanding it is as a medium to work in. You can do a lot of different things, but those things often require time. They might require different technologies. They might require different software. They all require a lot of thought and planning. And hopefully what Julia and I can cover in today's discussion is just unpacking some of those planning elements, some of the implications, and thinking through things broadly, as well as sharing some insights we have on creating variety of different videos. So when it comes to making video, we tend to think of really that production process. I've got to be in front of the camera, or I've got to have those slides, and then I'll narrate what I need to do, or maybe what software am I going to get to get all this. But it's a 3-part process. There's an important stage at pre-production, there's some production work, and there's post-production. And the way you spend your time in these really is quite important to think about. If you do a lot of work up front, you can really save your time in production and post-production. If you don't do a lot of planning and you kind of quickly rush through production, you may find yourself at the end going, oh gosh, I got to do this again, or I got to do that again, or I got to go through however many takes or edits. And so, it's really important to think about where do you want to spend your time. And it's really even more complicated than that. I think, based on Julia and I's experience, we see it more like this. So you have a couple of really big things up front. I think audience, especially, should be the driving factor. So for whom is that really kind of creates all the downstream implications. Other elements like purpose, materials, and design, of course, those really come to the fore in production when you're recording and delivering. But then there's also a number of elements as well in post-production. Editing can be a really time-consuming process, but if you work through pre-production and production well, it can actually be a really light process. And we're going to kind of walk through each one of these boxes with some further reflections and insights. So audience is really got to be the primary purpose that you think about and drive your video. You're making instructional videos for someone, and perhaps that's a very narrow audience. Perhaps a lot about that audience. That makes it easier. It might be a large or diverse audience, and that's it definitely gets more challenging. So the work we're doing in the Northwest Territories, that's really for everybody in the Northwest Territories. So that's a broad audience, people in a wide area of geography at all kinds of levels of digital literacy. And that makes it very challenging to kind of think about, well, what is the right chunk of content, for example? What do we need to show visually versus can we just say in an auditory context? On the opening up copyright side of things, that's a video series that we've been trying to develop for students, for faculty and staff at the university, for anyone in the library community or the general public. And that as well brings its own series of challenges and considerations. That said, there's some things that work well for every audience. Thinking about inclusive and accessible design, and I'll touch on that some more later. Another thing you want to think about too is internet access, and this is perhaps something that doesn't necessarily get highlighted a lot, but it's certainly something in the digital NWT work that we've been thinking about a fair bit. And so we can talk as we go about some of the considerations there. As well, you'll want to think about, what kind of screen are people viewing this on? I was in a conversation just the other day from the Opening Up Copyright project where we were talking about, should we redesign the website so it is better viewed on mobile versus computer? And I was able, because of the statistics, to tell that most of our viewers are on a computer. But you'll need to think about, screen size, things like that as well. And, I also spend a lot of time and work coming from the open education side of things and perspective. And so I'm always thinking there might be someone else who wants to take this apart and reuse it. So, even, for example, these slides, they come with a Creative Commons license. Someone could take them apart and find the green slides that are underneath them and remix them. The image on the left-hand side is something we found from the Opening Up Copyright project. It's we call it Joseph's Iron Triangle. We're reflecting on building videos on a very precise subject matter, copyright law. You can't, just be terribly vague and not specific. So you had to be very precise. It's also really, really boring. Engagement is a big challenge. How do you get someone to sit through a copyright video? And then as well, we were making these on an openly licensed basis. So how can we make them reusable? And we found that we could only ever kind of maximize 2 of those, and you can't really satisfy all 3. So it's like the good, fast, cheap triangle. You can get 2, but not 3. We found that precision, engagement, and reusability tend to have that same relationship. So purpose, along with audience, is the other big question. Why are you making the video? What is the purpose? That really kind of influences a lot of decisions around, tone, shape, format. And a copyright video that uses puppets is very engaging, but it might not be the most precise, or in our case, it ended up rather long, and perhaps that was a challenge with some of the engagement there. So you've got several kind of different levers that you can adjust in terms of the way you kind of shape and format a video. And you'll want to think about, for example, in a safety or some kind of security related video, you'll need an authoritative tone. You'll want information that's short and concise and really punches those key elements that you want to get people aware of. If you're trying to inspire people, it's probably a completely different approach. And so you'll want to think about how those different elements of purpose come into play. And that also, ties into some of the other elements around objectives. Learning objectives always tend to be cognitive. People will understand, people will remember, people will all these various cognitive traits. But it's useful to think about different behavioral and affective elements of video as well. Maybe you want people to feel something at the end of the video, and therefore it's not necessarily the instructional content, but the way that video is shaped. And I think, lastly, on the bottom, there's really these 2 elements, education and entertainment, and it's never a question of one or the other. They're always related, but they always are related through this idea of engagement. And I distinctly remember the very first time we had our first 2 copyright videos done. We took them down to the Center for Teaching and Learning at the university, and the instructional designer, they're interesting, they're just not engaging. And that was a really kind of insightful piece of feedback, is that you need to get other people's eyes on things, and you really need to take that idea of engagement and try and make it front and center. So quickly on universal design and open design. So we've seen a real interest over the last several years now in breaking down barriers to education. Universal design at its broadest level aims to ensure that people have a variety of ways of interacting and engaging with learning context. And so that would involve delivering and designing content for different mediums. When you are just dealing with video, then you're just dealing with video. But that also, aims to break down any barriers that people might have in terms of accessibility, and trying to make educational content and activities available in a variety of formats. So some of the video specific elements that come from that are trying to enable supporting assistive devices. So having things like alt text, making things like scripts available. That's one of the real benefits of scripting, is that even if you don't have closed captioning in, for example, having a transcript that someone can go back to and read makes the video more accessible. Another key element, of course, is trying to chunk content and arrange it in a way that the most important stuff is coming first. And this is in the same way you would try and format a document with the title up front in a large text, and then the heading 1 and heading 2 and heading 3. Same sort of principle applying in the flow of the video, and using navigation on it. So if it's a screen recording, highlighting the mouse, using arrows pointing to things specifically. Video allows that to be done rather easily. The good news is most of the stuff that supports universal design also supports open design. So over the past 20 years, big rise in interest in things like open access scholarly publishing, open source software, open educational resources. There is now a wealth of openly licensed material that's available, and it's not just images, it's sounds, it's videos, it's animations, you name it. You can find openly licensed material that you can incorporate, as well as you'll want to think about making your own outputs available for others to use as well. There's a lot of duplication and redesign when there doesn't necessarily have to be. And if you're really interested on where you can find some more open content, the Opening Up Copyright Project has a great video called Finding Open and Creative Commons Content that highlights all the different types of open content you can find, and includes references to some of the major sites you can use to find that content. So instructional avatars are another piece of considering instruction. And this allows one to really kind of take yourself out of the instruction and put someone else in. And so this is Mark. He was my instructional alter ego I created this past semester in the fall when I was teaching the instructional practices class. And I found Mark was useful. I only used him a couple of times because he kind of annoyed me. But I was able to bring Mark into my own videos to critique what I was doing. And so, it allowed me to have, now all of a sudden I could have a second person in the classroom, but it was really just some alter ego of myself. More broadly, though, I think the real interest in avatars, it could be something like this kind of cartoon face. You often see cartoon characters. These are ways to really broaden out instruction. We know people learn best when they feel a relationship to the person who's presenting the video. You can only appear a certain number of ways in an instructional video. And by using instructional avatars, you can actually broaden that out. And there is some literature as well that things can be used to increase engagement. Something perhaps to consider in a larger scale project, because these are time and software intensive. This Mark was created with Adobe's character animator software. And it certainly, it took a little bit of time, and I've got an example of Mark at the end, so we can see how he factors into to all of this. But something to think about, particularly if you want a video or a large set of videos that you want to, quickly adapt for different audiences, not having to replace the on-person screen person can be more easily done with an instructional avatar. In terms of technology, I think people sometimes get hung up on this, but there's really just a few things you need: a microphone and a computer. And in many cases, the microphone's now built into laptops. You could also just use a smartphone in some cases. You tend not to necessarily get the world's greatest amount of editing, but the technology one needs isn't very extensive. What if you're going to take on a lot of work though? You might want to think about a camera, a webcam. You can get a camcorder, but the video editing software is a really big piece that one will want to think about. It's where, particularly as the complexity of a project grows, you will spend a lot of time. And I think Julia and I have both probably spent an inordinate amount of time in video editing software to try and tweak things and get them looking right. You'll want to think as well, of course, about lighting, backdrop, and stage and props. I am not in the best lit corner of the basement, as it probably appears right now. And in fact, the screen itself is what is darkening out some of my light source. But you'll want to think about, as you kind of shoot video, what works. Thankfully, again, with this pandemic, no one is really expecting people to be in a film studio quality. You also want to think of, is there things in the background, or are there things you can have in hand that will be useful? Demonstration video, and I've got a little example of that, is rather challenging to shoot, particularly if you don't have access to kind of some larger space and proper equipment. The other thing as well you want to think about are the images, the sounds, the different types of content that you want to bring into things. And as I mentioned, there's a whole wealth of openly licensed content that you can draw on. Much more important than your materials or your technology are the skills, and it has been my distinct pleasure in the Opening Up Copyright project and Digital NWT to get to work with Julia in particular. These are a couple of behind the stage shots when we were filming puppet videos for our 2 Opening Up Copyright puppet-based videos, and I really want to highlight that this isn't just any old motley crew of people. These are 3 professional actors that I've had the distinct pleasure of working with. Maren Carwigan on the left-hand side, Chris Joseph in the center there, and then of course Julia, and of course Chris also worked on the Opening Up Copyright project for some time. And it was really having Chris and then Julia on that project that has broadened my view on not only the value of having professionals involved, but also the rich depth of skills and knowledge they bring. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia, who can talk about some of those different skills and insights.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, you have a way of finding the theater people in the crowd of first years. So I'm just going to take it over here, and I'm going to start by talking about different types of videos. So Michael's mentioned a few of these, but one of them would be direct address, which is basically what I'm doing now, except recorded. So it's when you, the person who's conveying the knowledge, is doing it directly, looking through the lens at your audience. You can also film scenes. For us, probably the closest thing would be the puppets, but that's when there's characters and dialogue, and the audience is kind of a fly on the wall, looking through the fourth wall at a situation. You can also do more of a documentary style, things like conducting interviews or recording how-to videos where people are demonstrating things. You can also do screen recording, which, as Michael's mentioned, we've done a lot of, really leaning into those animation features on PowerPoint and then screen recording that way. Or if you're demonstrating something online or using a computer, screen recording is obviously the great option. You can also make videos, though, without doing any filming or recording at all. So if you're worried about not having a good camera or anything like that, as Michael said, there's lots of stock footage out there, images you can use. So you can cut together quite a bit of materials. You can put text on top, add voiceover, and create things without actually doing any original recording. And what we do a lot of is kind of a combination of all these things. So talking direct address, putting some images in, maybe there's a slide that we've used because we wanted to use a certain animation, and then kind of cutting it all together. We wanted to give a shout out actually to Surgery 101, which you might be familiar with, but they're a series of podcasts and videos. They have a YouTube channel. And it's basically an introduction to surgery. And they do a really good job of experimenting with lots of different genres and video types. So if you're looking for some inspiration, we would recommend checking them out as well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about scripting. So no matter what type of video you want to make, Writing a script is usually a good idea. It ensures that you don't miss anything for starters. So, you want to make sure that you're including everything that you want to include and that you're doing it in a really intentional way, leading with the really important stuff, as Michael said. It also allows you to be more concise. You don't go down tangents or lean a little bit too much on one particular topic. So it allows you to be a little bit more concise. It also allows you to plan visuals, which is something I would highly recommend. So as we're writing the scripts, I'll usually have notes jotted down about, I think this would be direct address. I think I'd want the text on the screen for this. And that's just going to save you so much time later on to kind of pair those things together as you're developing. And as Michael said, you can also make the scripts available. So that increases accessibility. And it also makes things easier to cite. I know I've cited things from the Indigenous Canada MOOC, for example, because they have all their transcripts along with the course. So you make sure that you're going to be quoted correctly, et cetera. And sometimes the speech to text features on things like YouTube or Zoom, they're not always accurate. So it's nice to have a little bit more control over that as well. There are, however, some challenges with scripts. And one challenge is that delivery, when you've really thought of exactly what you want to say, sometimes it can come off a little monotone or a little rehearsed, a little disingenuous. So I'll talk a little bit about ways to help with that going forward. Also, you don't really want to use scripts when you're conducting interviews. So that may sound a little counterintuitive, but you never want to give the interviewee a copy of the questions you're going to ask them. They will probably want you to, but you should not do that. You can plan maybe roughly what you want to ask, but if you ever have watched politicians answer questions, that's sort of how it ends up looking. So you end up with kind of a formal, not really genuine sort of interaction. So for interviews, it's better not to provide the exact questions. One other example where a script might not be the best idea is if you just have too much content to try and do. So I think maybe Michael can speak to this a little bit, but if you're a professor and you have to make 3 hours of video every week for your classes because they're all online all of a sudden, that's not totally doable. And also your audience is trapped. They have to watch the videos. So, if you end up having a long-winded video in that situation, it's, maybe not the end of the world because they'll probably get through it either way. So those are some examples, maybe the few occasions when a script is not as important. And I'll just go over quickly some script writing tips. So these are things that we have just experienced going through all of our different projects that we think might be useful. So one thing to keep in mind when you're writing a script for video is that your audience will likely not have the script right in front of them, which sounds really obvious, but they're not going to be able to see the bullet points or the colons or semicolons that help us kind of make sense of sentences. So you want to keep the sentences really concise and the language relatively simple, or at least appropriate to the audience. You also want to consider tone. So this is something that you can do when you're looking at the purpose of the video, but the tone should be on purpose and consistent. So for example, if you want to really stress the gravity of a situation, you're going to want to include an authoritative tone in the language you use as well as the delivery. And same if you want more of a approachable, welcoming tone, just good to include that right into the language. The most important thing, I think, when you're writing a script is to read it aloud. You will not realize the tongue twisters that you have given yourself until you read it aloud for yourself. And you can also just get a sense of oh, that looks fine on paper, but it sounds weird. And kind of similarly, you also really want to time it. And you want to time your script by reading it aloud. Because if you read it in your head and time it, you will end up with a very, very different time. Short is always better. We've said that already a few times, and we'll probably say it again, but short is always better. As you're writing your scripts, always come back to the audience and the purpose of the video. Cut things that aren't important. Just really try to get it down to what it is that's the key and the heart of the video, and make sure your language is appropriate to the audience. And then think of visuals as you go, which I sort of already talked about there. Just making sure you don't have a huge chunk of text for a tiny video clip. You're going to want to start brainstorming things to fill that in or cutting that down a bit. All right, and now what I'm going to do is move on to the filming and recording part, which I have a feeling is maybe what most people are curious about. So when you're filming and recording, you have to find a quiet space. No one, even the big film, audio artists don't want to cut out sirens and cut out dogs barking and things like that. So finding a quiet space it'll just be so much easier if you don't have to edit out things like that. Making a schedule is also really important. That is especially important if you're working with different people and you want to stay on track. If you say book a space for 2 hours, I can almost guarantee that first hour and a half will be on the very first thing you have to film. So it's a really good idea to make a schedule and try to stick to it and be realistic. But you can also make a schedule just for filming on your own. So when I have a lot of things to film, and I know that some things will be direct address and some things I'll put images over top of, I always film all of the direct address, me in front of the camera stuff at the same time so that the lighting will remain consistent throughout that part. And then I always record the sound in the same space as that. So the sound remains consistent because it's in the same space, and the lighting remains consistent for that part that's filmed that way. Usually, I'm not doing it today, but usually I would face a window with a sheer curtain so that I have direct and even light all going at me evenly so I don't get the shadows, just as another little sidebar there. You really want to prepare beforehand. So even if I'm doing a screen recording and I'm not going to be on camera, I will mark up my script with every single time I'm going to click the slide forward, just so I can just record it all in one chunk and makes editing super easy. Or if I'm speaking right to the camera, I'll mark out what sections I need to memorize and then get started on that. When you are filming, you want to position the camera just slightly above your eye line. It's a little low for me today, like maybe like that would have been slightly better. So that's just a good spot for it. And you want to make sure your mic is directly in front of you. Usually you want to get as close to the mic as you can, but as long as it's centered, you shouldn't have too much trouble. When you're filming, you want to maintain your vocal energy and mic location throughout. And you also want to keep the background and the lighting as consistent as you can, because those continuity things really make a difference. They're quite distracting. For me, I have to decide, is it behind the ears? Is it in front of the ears? It has to be one or the other, because you can't go shot to shot with hair out, hair back, hair up. You gotta plan these things. Doesn't sound like you would have to, but it's always a good idea. When you first start filming, make sure you do a test. That's when you'll notice the thing is in your teeth, or there's something like someone's dishwasher is on next door or whatever. I'm in an apartment building. If you're in a house, you probably wouldn't notice the dishwasher, but just things like that. Good to do a test. Also, I found out like my mic was unplugged one time, and I was about to do like 3 hours of filming, so I was really glad that I did that. If you make a mistake when you're filming, which you inevitably will, if you stumble over your words or get a frog in your throat, I recommend going back to the start of the section and just taking a whole nother run at it. You don't want to set yourself up for editing out every little or sound or stumble. It's just better to have a bunch of clean takes that then all you have to do is put together in order. I'd also say, if it's possible, try to save only the good takes. So that's what I do when I'm just filming with my camera on my laptop, is if I mess up the take, I'll just delete it right away. It's not always possible to do that. When we're using a camera, like with the puppet videos, we did little slates like you would if you're filming a movie, a slate, just saying scene 1, take 2. And then I just would jot down, take 2 was the good one. Check that one first, kind of thing. Just gonna make your life easier. Also, always remember to record a little bit of white noise in the space that you're in case you do need to cover up any sounds. It's nice just to have that empty space that will match the rest of the video. I think that's all I have for filming and recording, but if there are questions that come up, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'm sure we'll have a discussion afterwards. So like I said, I come from an acting background, so I have to talk a little bit about delivery. So I'm going to talk about gaze, being natural, and clarity. So gaze is when I say that, I mean your eye line, what you're doing with your eyes when you're talking to the camera. And it sounds funny, but I find that it can actually make quite a big difference. So when you're looking directly at the camera and doing a direct address video, you want to look at the lens as if you're looking into someone's eyes, which sounds very cheesy. But you want to really imagine the person you're talking to and sort of interact with that lens as if they're a person right in front of you. And if it's hard to kind of understand what I mean, you can also just imagine looking through the camera. So rather than having a hard focus on the little black dot, just think of looking past your camera at an audience. One thing that's really interesting, and it's something we learned in theater, but I think really is especially true in video, is if you drop your gaze, the audience will drop their gaze also. So if you look down to read your notes, or even if you're just thinking the way you would naturally, if you look down, you can really disengage your audience. It's kind of like if you're ever out somewhere and someone looks at their phone and then suddenly everyone's looking at their phone. So just trying to make sure that you always have your head up. And if it feels weird having like always such a hard gaze on the camera, you can also find ideas up and out rather than dropping your gaze, because if you do it, the audience will do it as well. I really am a firm believer in memorizing. I think it's good to just memorize a few sentences and then decide to put in an image or cut away to something else after that few sentences if you have trouble memorizing a large chunk of text. So that's a little bit about gaze and your eyes. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about clarity. So obviously we are making educational videos because we have something we want people to learn. So clarity is really important. So vocally, it's a really good idea to keep your vocal energy going all the way to the very end of your thoughts. As Canadians, well, I mean, maybe you're not all Canadians, but it's definitely a really common thing here where people will drop the ends of their words and they'll also lose their energy at the end of sentences. And when people do that, you can just really lose the sense of what it is they're trying to say if they don't finish what they're saying. So that's just an example. It feels awful doing it, so don't do it. But just maintaining your vocal energy all the way to your ends of your sentences. It sounds a little forced in our own heads at the beginning, but it's just a good trick. Articulation is obviously really important. If you're finding that you're getting feedback that maybe you need to articulate more or you're not enunciating enough, one little trick is to focus on the N consonants. So the letter N sits in our mouth, right on the gum ridge, which is where most of our consonants land in our mouth, where our tongue hits the surface of our mouth. So if you focus on the N's, you might find that everything just magically kind of falls into place. So that's just a little trick. In terms of the speed of your delivery, you want to make that appropriate to your audience. And remember that if something is new or if you're introducing a new concept that you haven't talked about yet in the video, that might need to happen a little bit slower. Otherwise, though, you'd be surprised at actually how quick you can talk and still be followed. We're used to things going really quick, action sequences, little quick TikTok videos and things. So you'd be surprised that if a concept is something that you've already touched on, you can speak quicker than you think. When you're delivering your content, you want to make sure that you're really thinking about what it is that you're saying. And this comes into the being natural part too. It's so hard not to just listen to the sound of your own voice or wonder if you look dumb or whatever. But if you really focus on the meaning of the words, you will be less nervous, and you'll also just make a lot more sense if you're really thinking through the thoughts as you're saying them. It's also a good idea to stress, if you can, only the most important words. So that's things like verbs are usually really important, and nouns that haven't been introduced yet. If you're wondering, that's usually a good place to start to look for what words are important to emphasize. In terms of being natural, you just got to imagine you're talking to a real person, because you are. So it's just a good idea to keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe you can picture them. Sounds cheesy, but it'll also make you feel a little more connected to what it is that you're trying to communicate. I also find it's really nice to have an intention behind what you're doing. It'll distract you from thinking too much about the sound of your own voice and whether or not you messed up that take again or whatever. So if you have the intention to be really clear, or if you have the intention to, put people at ease or whatever it is, that can just help trick you into feeling a little more comfortable being in front of a camera. All right, so that's it for delivery. So editing, this is the fun part. Editing is where all the tears are shed. I would just like to give you a few tips. So one thing we found really useful is keeping a file of all the raw footage. Things can get deleted so easily. So I always save, video title raw, and I save that and I make a copy and work with that one. So you always have that to fall back on. Make sure you turn the volume up really loud when you're editing. That's when you're going to hear your neighbor's cat or the doorbell or whatever it is that you need to cut out. So turn it up all the way. And also check for volume consistency. So you can see the levels usually on the bottom that you can check there. Or sometimes I'll just randomly click throughout just to compare the volumes at different points in the video. When you're editing, cast yourself as the viewer. So make sure you're really thinking, like, if I didn't know what I was going to say next, like, does that transition rushed, or would that make sense to me? So just being really critical, even though you know what's coming next, your audience will not. This is a hard one, but cut it if it doesn't serve the purpose. So even if you blew the whole budget on this cool special effect, or you spent all your time on this one section, if it really doesn't fit the video, it should go. And lastly, just keep it dynamic. So you don't want to have the screen frozen on something still for too long. You want to swoop in with something different, just to keep it moving and to hold the audience's attention. Yeah, and then I'll pass it back to Michael here to talk about interactivity.
So thank you, Julia. And I'm going to just play. I think this hopefully will just run on a loop in the background here. This is an example of H5P, and there's several different ways one can get interactivity. The first, as the pop-up in the video playing discusses, is the Dora the Explorer method, where you ask a question and then just pause. It's not a great means of encouraging interactivity. You're forced to put some generic answers in, but it can add a little bit of something to make the video more engaging. In terms of commercial software, there is some particularly powerful options. Captivate and Articulate are two really good pieces of software. They allow for a wide range of different interactive elements. The challenges are they are expensive pieces of software. And so that leads us to a third approach, which is H5P, and that's what we see kind of going on in the video here. H5P is an open source interactive overlay. So you add it on to other videos, and then you can also download or copy other people's H5P and use it or adapt it. Video here that shows this, a couple of different examples. There's the simple pop-ups, with the Dora the Explorer. You could do drag and drop. You can do different multiple choice questions, and you can have links. You can also patch content on over. So if you have a small change to make, you can use the H5P to do things that way. One of the things we're looking about in the Opening Up Copyright project now is with the copyright term changing, how can we use little H5P notices to say the copyright term has changed rather than rebuilding the whole video? And that's going to save us a lot of time that way. One of the challenges on this H5P software, though, you need to have an H5P platform for that H5P code to live on. So to put that in normal language, videos exist in YouTube primarily. There are a couple of different other platforms, and then you need something like a WordPress site or Moodle, different learning management software, and then you import the YouTube video and have the H5P content added over that. So I put this video up inside of the Opening Up Copyright YouTube channel, and then within our WordPress site for the project, that's where I added the H5P content. And so people who go to the project website would get the H5P version there. Another important element to think about is distribution. And this is probably something that most people don't necessarily jump right to. Of course, we've got wonderful distribution platforms in YouTube, other video sharing services. There is just the internet itself. There's also, different learning management contexts in various school and academic settings. But in other times and in other cases, you'll want to think about, how might you reach those without broadband or without a lot of digital devices. This is a picture here of some of the hundreds of USBs that I have copied to get things ready for the Northwest Territories. Just the other day, I got another box of 250 USBs that I'll over time load up and send north. So things like USBs, CDs, DVDs, these work well for contexts where there may not be a lot of broadband. Another thing to keep in mind too, particularly for rural and remote individuals, and that's across this province, across all of the provinces, and certainly up north or elsewhere, is bandwidth as well. Video is a very data intensive medium, and so it can be really costly for people to watch video. I give you an example of people in satellite communities in the Northwest Territories. For them to watch a 2-hour video, if they're already at their data cap, that's going to cost them $20 out of their own pocket just in data overage charges. And we know from some of the work we've done in the NWT that people spending over $1,000 a month. So things like file size can have a really big impact on how much data a video takes, and that's of course related to video quality as well. So you can go out and get a $2,000 smartphone and shoot an 8K Ultra HD video, but that file is going to be absolutely massive, and it also kind of impacts some of those other elements as well. Really large files are really data intensive to edit as well. So you'll need, if you're going to make really long videos in really high quality, you're going to need a really powerful computer to do that as well. So something to think about. Again, distribution is usually not a big concern, but it does impact many of those other earlier steps, and you can find yourself kind of caught on things if you leave it to the very end. Now is the time in the presentation where we want to do the test. I joke, of course, no one actually likes tests. We know this from the Opening Up Copyright project. We use H5P to include some test questions at the end. This is an example on the right-hand side of a viewer retention piece of data from YouTube. And you can see there's that cliff that comes right after the thank you for your attention slide. And that's where we then pose questions about the video. Their purpose is to reinforce the learning, but they also seem to alienate most users. You see we get about a 30% drop off as soon as we hit the test questions. That said, there's a couple of different reasons why you may want to think about assessment. Certainly, if you're making videos for instruction, there's value to testing whether people are learning anything from those videos. So, assessment has a direct connection in that regard. There's also, I think, some other non-cognitive elements you may want to test for as well. So the affective quality of the video, thinking about engagement. It is no good to have a video that has a lot of informational content if people won't watch it because they just don't get to that. And then there's a second element related to assessment as well, and that is thinking about analytics and metrics for video. So because we've used YouTube in the Opening Up Copyright project, I can tell you, what share of viewers watch on a Mac versus on a PC, versus, how many people watch on a smartphone versus a computer, where are they coming from, like what URLs are they searching for, are they clicking through the little suggestions at the end of the video. YouTube, of course, because of its commercial platform, has incredible analytic data, and that type of data can be really useful if you've got to communicate value of a project to funders. So, I can roll off all kinds of stats from the project because YouTube is able to capture those, and then in turn I have to report those to the different bodies that have helped fund that project. So something to think about. And of course, it's related to distribution as well. So we have a couple of examples that we'll play, and I think we'll just play the two examples. And Julia, if you want to add anything, we'll give a chance there, and then we're pretty much ready for questions after the examples. So.
Copyright is the automatic legal right of a creator to publish, print, or sell copies of their original work for a certain number of years. It is meant to protect you by preventing people from using your work without your permission. which would mean losing both control of your work and your ability to sell something you have created. Copyright can be a very useful thing because it means that there are some restrictions about how others can use your work. For example, if you write a book, someone cannot take that book, photocopy the entire thing, and then sell it themselves, which is great. However, there are some issues with copyright, and as we mentioned, it is very ill-suited for community knowledge. Let's take a closer look at that definition. While rights holders can authorize different uses to different individuals or groups of individuals through separate licenses, open licensing is an efficient way to grant the same set of rights to all users. For example, in the 1930s, iconic American folk singer Woody Guthrie distributed a lyric sheet of songs to fans saying, "This song is copyrighted in the U.S. under seal of copyright number 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anybody caught singing it without our permission will be mighty good friends of ourn, 'cause we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it. We wrote it, and that's all we wanted to do." Today, if Woody or another creator wanted everyone to be able to copy their entire work without requiring permission, instead of separately granting permission to every group or individual, an open license can be used to grant the right to copy to all users.
Hi there. Hiya.
What brings you to the library?
Well, I was hoping that you might have a book that I'm looking for.
Let's check. What's the title?
A Zoogeographical Study of the Land Snails of Ontario by John Otten. What?
Oh, yes, here it is. Written in 1948, was it?
That's the one!
Wonderful. It seems we don't have it in our holdings at this library, but through an interlibrary loan, we can have a copy sent here for you from another library. Shall I place an ILL request for you?
Anita Weird Book.
Lovely.
So those are three examples there. Of course, the stock footage with the screen recording and direct address all mixed together. Then the slides and narration, and then the puppets. Julie, do you have anything you want to add just about those three?
Not really. I mean, as you can see there, we're not going to get an Oscar for those, but they're kind of an example. We chose those clips to sort of demonstrate sort of the three ways that we've been making videos and how you can kind of mix and match different elements to do something that, works and conveys what you want to, just really simply.
All right, team, it's me, Mark, and now we're going to review our learning of common video best practices by checking to see how this video does against the list. Does it have learning objectives? No. Does it use scripts? Not at all. Does it have interactivity? Not a lick. Does it avoid jargon and chunk content? Maybe a little bit at best. Avoid text-filled blocks? Did you see those last few slides? Hey, use a conversational narrative like me, Mark? No, not really. And it's nowhere near short. Maybe we should tell Dr. McNally to try over again. Okay, so now it's time to build a simple wired network in our community. We have different users spread all over, and of course there's the pop, and we're using our ball of yarn, and we need to connect each one of the users. I wouldn't tie the yarn through, but just kind of thread it through the hole for the various users, and we can go about building a simple wired network. So I'll show you on my map, and you could try it on yours. I won't play the full clip there, but that was just two more examples. The first one coming from class where I really had all semester long been not living up to the best practices in video, and decided to play with that with Mark because that lecture specifically was on instructional video. And one of the things I found, I tested the students the next week to see if they could remember the best practices. And students could recall a few of them, but they all said, if I ever had to find those best practices, I sure as heck know where to look because I could remember Mark, and he sticks out visually in the lecture. He kind of only appeared for that certain point. And then this last example is doing some demonstration where I'm trying to lead people through an activity. And that is, I think it's one of the most challenging forms of instruction to do performative events and guide people. But it's as you can see, there's a little bit of the speeding up.
So for your first time, you probably just,
which I found was quite a useful thing as well to think about is how can you slow down or speed up footage, which is something video, of course, allows that you can't do in real life. You just have to end up having to do it over and over again.
All right, team, it's me.
Okay, well, that brings us largely to the end. Julia, do you have anything else before we get to questions?
No, nothing to add.
All right, and of course, and there's an email for both of us, so we're happy to take any questions now, or if you want to send things later. And if you, Kaylee is going to make the slides available as well, so you can get the sources if you're interested. And thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, you guys. That was fantastic. I've got lots of notes for myself for the next time I have to make myself a video. So that was wonderful. So yeah, we can do Q&A right now. So if you could use the Q&A panel, not the chat box, the Q&A panel, we can go through questions. Okay, so we have a question here coming in from Lucas. What does your process of deciding whether a video is even the correct choice look like? For instance, when you're wanting to communicate something, how do you decide to use video versus newsletter versus email versus puppet show?
Well, in many cases, that decision has kind of come either at the very beginning, so on a project basis. So for opening up copyright, there was a real decision to build video right from the start. I mean, it's a video-based project. It's created some academic scholarship, but the decision was, there's lots of good legal resources. You can't substitute reading the Supreme Court, or you can substitute reading the Copyright Act. It's terrible. But there's very good scholarly sources, but there isn't a lot that aims to engage the public, and especially that's more than, say, 2 minutes long. And so we felt that video was a medium that could be used to A, deliver that content to students, B, make it available across the university, and then across I'd say the world, although it's Canadian copyright, so across the rest of the country. And as well, the other thing too is, video worked well because it was something that could be inserted into a face-to-face class or an online class. And so it really saved a lot of duplication of effort. And a real hats off to our copyright librarian, Amanda Wakarak, who, if she could, she'd probably try and teach all 40,000 people at the University of Alberta everything about copyright, but she just can't clone herself that many times. So video was a real way of kind of meeting the educational goals that we had. And in digital NWT, that project initially had no video. It is premised on in-person instruction. That is what is strongly preferred, especially in communities in the Northwest Territories. It was modeled around a system of train the trainer, where we'd have adult educators in the communities teaching, and University of Alberta and other partners developing content. And we were shoehorned into video because of the pandemic. And so it wasn't a first choice. And that activity I played at the very end with the map that's done in groups. We were very fortunate that they've now been able to go back to in-person instruction, and so that video plays in a classroom, and people watch it and then do it. Video wasn't a choice there. So in some cases, those decisions are made right at the beginning or imposed.
Okay, next question here from Stan. What is the best editing software for GOA applications?
GOA applications being Government of Alberta.
I'll wait here and see if Stan can give us a little bit of clarification on that.
That's okay, because maybe we can speak a little bit more broadly to video editing software. Yeah. So yes.
Yes.
So, you know, I can't speak specifically to the GOA context, but we've used a variety of different options. I think one of the challenges is certainly there are very good proprietary and commercial options, and the open source alternatives are getting better, but they're still challenging. So I've used Camtasia to do most of my end on the PC side of things, and I found it to be quite useful. It's got a license attached to it, so there is a cost. And I know, Julia, you've had some other experiments.
Yeah, well, I'm a Mac user, so I just use iMovie, which is already built in there. And I just use my FaceTime camera that's also built in. I do have a fancier mic, but other than that, I just use exactly what my computer came with.
And I think on the open source side, OpenShot is one of the better editing pieces of software. So it's open source, so it can be freely used and obtained. But it's certainly, I mean, I think if you're going to take on a large scale project, it's worth considering. I mean, I'm a big open proponent, and so I feel bad promoting proprietary products. But if you're going to do a lot of video editing, it's worthwhile to have some software, and more than anything, to have the time to get comfortable with it, because there are all kinds of features and boxes and options buried in menus in different places. And in fact, you know, within the digital NWT project, we did a little bit of exploring with the Adobe Premiere Pro, and in general, we found the learning curve was too high to quickly ramp up a lot of video production. We had a lot of content to produce, and we didn't have time to learn the editing. So we did some things with one student who had the time to learn Premiere Pro, and then other things elsewhere. So comfort level being a real big option too.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Please feel free, use the Q&A chat.
So there's one in the chat about video quality for viewers. And so certainly, I think one of the things that's important to note is that depending on the program you're using, and including Zoom, there are different webcam quality standards that are built in. Sometimes, especially with Zoom and others, they'll lower by default the quality of the video to save bandwidth. And so you can go through, and I know Zoom has an option where you can you know, decide whether it's going to, you know, record or play your camera in HD quality. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think as well, another you know, good point is that there's, you know, the HD standards of 720p or pixels and 1080p. Those are pretty similar to most people's eye. Is if they end up on a big screen, though, you can discern the differences, but they make a huge difference in terms of file size.
Okay, we've had another question come in. Karen would like to know, avoiding chunk content was recommended. Can you give a couple of examples of chunk content?
So I think that the slide is avoiding jargon and chunk content. So you want to avoid jargon, but you want to chunk content means chunking the content down, breaking it down into smaller chunks. So you know, within the digital NWT project, for example, Julia recorded an hour's worth of video, but we broke that into 6 chunks, and so each video kind of was a smaller unit, and that allowed us to focus, learning objectives for each one of those 6 pieces. So jargon is something that, and that's where the transcripts really come in. And we saw the example there with GOA acronym, wanting to make sure it was the right GOA, especially as you get a broader and broader audience. Acronyms, different types of jargon really start to fall down and trip up users. So avoid jargon, but do chunk the content into smaller and smaller pieces.
There you go, talking away with my mute on. Doesn't look like there's any other questions coming through, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, you guys. This was a fantastic presentation. Lots of content and tips. This session was recorded, so once the recording is ready, I will send link out to everybody who is registered for today's session. Oh, we've just had one last question come in here. Sandra would like to know, I use an iPad for video recording. Can you recommend a microphone?
I can't offhand specifically for the iPad, but I do. One of the things we bought with the Opening Up Copyright project was a better microphone, especially given that if you're doing text narration over screenshot, no one ever appears on camera. You don't need to worry, but you can in some cases if you're trying to sync up a microphone and a webcam. I have run into some challenges there. Julie, I don't know if do you have anything to add?
I don't own an iPad, but do they have a USB port? No, then I use a USB cord mic. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you, both of you, for joining us and for presenting. That's greatly appreciated. And yeah, thank you to everybody who joined and watched our presentation today. Much appreciation to everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, everyone.